public release event for the 2021 annual report to Congress, and I'm going to hand it over to our chair, Carolyn Bartholomew.
Thank you very much, Jameson. Good morning, everybody. As Jameson said, and welcome to the release of our 2021 annual report to Congress. Got copies of it right here. I am pleased to note that the report was once again unanimous, reflecting the bipartisan nature of U.S. China policy. I would like to thank the Commission staff for their work on this report and throughout the year, and the many witnesses and experts with whom the Commission consulted. I would also like to thank my colleagues for their commitment to our mission and their good cheer as we worked through sometimes contentious issues to come to consensus. This report has 32 recommendations for the Congress across a broad range of economic and national security topics, and we look forward to briefing the Hill. The Chinese Communist Party's ambitions for global leadership became ever clearer in this, the CCP's centennial year. Announcing its goal to provide the world with a new model of human advancement, the Chinese government deepened its embrace of aggression, wolf warrior behavior, and coercion, heightening concerns throughout the Indo-Pacific and elsewhere in the world about China's rise. As it grows increasingly belligerent in some places and bellicose in others, China's leaders have put the onus of improving relationships on the other party. Claiming that it cannot compromise, the CCP demands deference from the U.S., Australia, and others. It mistakenly insists that every action it takes is correct. It cannot tolerate dissent at home or criticism for other countries, because to do so would undermine the party's claims to the superiority of its system and cast doubts on its decision-making. This morning, I will focus primarily on security issues, and Vice Chairman Cleveland will talk about the economic ones. The Commission concluded that the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, is at or near initial capability to invade Taiwan. At our hearing on deterrence in the Taiwan Strait, we documented the PLA's capabilities and expect that it will continue building on these capabilities, supported by high levels of defense spending and the fielding of new advanced warships, aircraft, and missiles. We also noted that an invasion of Taiwan would be a high-risk option for the PLA and identified factors that could deter Chinese leaders from ordering an attack. In June, we held a hearing on China's nuclear forces, now much in the news. China's increasingly aggressive behavior is backstopped by its most substantial activity to expand, modernize, and diversify its nuclear forces since it first acquired nuclear weapons in the 1960s. China is now on a trajectory to become a qualitative, if not quantitative, nuclear peer to the U.S. in the next decade. This expansion gives China new strategic options for escalation in a regional crisis and heightens the risk of unforeseen escalation or accidental nuclear exchange. In the crossover of economic and national security issues, we have recommendations to tighten our export controls, protect American investors, and ensure U.S. capital does not support China's military-industrial complex. We also document the harsh crackdown on Hong Kong and the destruction of its basic freedoms, including the right to free speech and to organize. The CCP's actions against the people of Hong Kong demonstrate once again that Beijing cannot be trusted to adhere to its international obligations. And we held a hearing on China's activities in Latin America, where it's growing presence both in search of where it is growing its presence both in search of the acquisition of resources and political influence. Our report in 2020 talked about Chinese leaders viewing themselves as in a decades-long competition with the United States and other democracies over the future of the global order. This year, the CCP showed itself increasingly willing to escalate that competition into confrontation. We hope our recommendations will be of use to Congress as it acts on legislation to defend U.S. interests and those of our partners, friends, and allies. I will now turn to Vice Chairman Cleveland for her remarks. Robin, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn, for your leadership of the Commission, and thanks to colleagues and staff for their substantial patience and contribution this year. As we look at the U.S. China economic and trade relationship, we have decades of experience, and we know two simple things. We know they allow access to their markets when it suits their needs, And we know there's always a gap between commitments and actions. This is an especially important caution as we head into the most perilous period in our relationship. After decades of state subsidies, state champions, state exclusion of foreign companies from China's markets, and extensive privileges to SOEs, state-owned enterprises, China hasn't seen the employment, innovation, and growth they expected. Indeed, exploding debt, an aging population, which means a shrinking labor pool requiring major improvements in pension and healthcare, challenges of income inequality, and a supply overhang in housing combined with casino-level rampant speculation all speak to deep, long-term structural issues. The CCP has committed again and again to shift from an investment-led model to open markets and domestic consumption. This simply has not happened. The evidence in their actions make clear open markets are not an option. Rather than acknowledge the failure of state-subsidized enterprises to achieve innovation and growth, the CCP is repeating past mistakes and doubling down on state intervention, this time in the non-state sector. Our report offers a detailed examination of this approach in three important emerging areas of competition: autonomous vehicles and new energy vehicles, biosynthetics, and then cloud computing, AI, and quantum computing. Overall, we see three trends that make clear the party's not letting up on the top-down throttle. First, over the past few years, 1,741 government guidance funds have been established. The rapid growth is troubling, especially as there's no real evidence of success. One example, they've invested $21 billion in funding to target China's domestic chip-making capabilities, which has performed poorly. With a goal of generating 40% domestically sourced chips by 2020, Chinese companies have manufactured roughly 6% of the chips used in China. The second trend of concern is since 2017, 73% of non-state firms have established party cells, interfering in personnel and management decisions. And finally, we see an increased effort of government entities to take ownership stakes in non-state companies. Didi and ByteDance come to mind in this area. This year, we heard two competing perspectives on the PRC. One witness testified that we should question the CCP's motives and not fund our enemies, while the American Chamber of Commerce in China says that 85% of their members are not considering relocation. While some see risks, others see rewards. Rather than evaluate the motivation of the CCP, the Commission examined and concluded there is no evidence of course correction. To paraphrase one witness, she said, they are continuing to charge off in the wrong direction, which puts at risk both retail and institutional investors and our national security economic relationship. The CCP views the world in zero-sum terms. Although there is a path to progress that promotes free market principles, they've chosen instead to protect and preserve the CCP's control and power. And given the blurred lines between civilian and security interests in China, the party choosing this path means global investment may fund the military modernization of an adversary. To address the consequences of the CCP's choices, we have recommended substantial changes to rationalize and make consistent the U.S. approach to sanctions and export controls, establish regulatory policies and practices governing index providers. We've recommended improvements in the disclosure of the presence of CCP cells in U.S. firms, and improvements in the regulation of risks related to investment structures known as variable interest entities, and weaknesses in investors' legal recourse. We recommend compulsory disclosure of Chinese bank lending terms by recipients of U.S. aid to avoid free riding. And finally, we've recommended regulation of Chinese firms' U.S. operations, including autonomous vehicle testing in the United States and provision of cloud computing services overseas. Again, I really appreciate the work of our colleagues in our hearings this year. and the staff in putting together this substantial volume, and I will turn to Jameson for guidance on how we'll proceed on questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Chair, and again, welcome everyone. Just a quick note on instructions about how to ask questions of commissioners. So today we do have a live question and answer session. So we'll be using the raise hand feature. If you're on a computer, simply click the participants button, which is in the lower right corner of your WebEx screen. And then just above the participants button, there'll be a small picture of a hand. Click that, will put you into the queue in order to ask a question. If you're on mobile, please click the participants button at the top of your screen. It'll be sort of a human bust with 3 lines, and then click the tiny hand at the bottom of your screen to get into the queue. For everybody, once you're done asking your question, please unclick the raise hand feature so we can recognize other questioners. Again, keep your questions brief so we can get to as many as we can, and again, state your question in the form of a question if you could. Commissioners do hope to get to everyone's questions today. If you're having any technical issues with WebEx or other things that you need help with, email contact@uscc.gov. That's contact@uscc.gov with your question, and we'll do our best to address it during the event. I believe we already have a question from a Joseph Newman. Joseph, could you state your affiliation and your question for commissioners?
I have just a question. Are we not going to war with this situation, are we? Because China is pretty powerful.
I didn't hear the first part of the question. China is pretty powerful is what I heard, but I didn't hear.
We are not going to war, are we? Are we in a war situation?
You know, maybe I will turn this question over to one of our security expertise. Senator Talent, do you want to give this one a shot?
Well, it's been the object of every American administration to preserve the peace in East Asia and in China's near seas, and to do that by maintaining a forward position of sufficient strength so as to deter anybody who would seek to aggress against American allies or America's interests. So that's certainly the object of the government, to protect our interests without conflict. It's been the policy of every administration since I came to Washington to do that. However, Beijing may have different ideas about which options it might seek to pursue.
All right, thank you very much, Jameson. Let's move on to the next question.
Can't hear Jameson. Jameson, we can't hear you.
Apologies. Bill Gertz is next on the list. Bill, please state your affiliation and your question.
Yeah, hi, Bill Gertz with the Washington Times. Could you elaborate a little bit more on your findings about the PLA achieving near or initial operating capability for an assault on Taiwan? And what do you think the United States should do to build deterrence against such an assault?
Hey, Bill, it's Carolyn. I think I'm probably on this one going to turn over the question to Senator Talent again, but I will note that it is one of we always pick our top 10 recommendations, and we've got a list of things in there that we think that we need to be doing in order to strengthen our own position in the region. Jim?
Yeah, sure, Bill. And if Roy Camphausen and Alex Wong, others may wish to chime in. Well, Bill, what we found was that the Chinese are at or near an initial invasion capability, which means the ability to conduct the land invasion of Taiwan, even assuming American intervention, albeit at very high risk. And it would be surprising, really, if they were not at least approaching that, given their robust buildup of PLA capabilities, really going back several decades. And as we found numerous times in our reports, and DOD has found as well, One of the priority missions that they have given the PLA to prepare for is to invade Taiwan should the Chinese Communist Party decide that they want to do that. So the pace of that buildup is, if anything, quickening. DOD has found, for example, that the number of intermediate range ballistic missile launchers, I think we have this in our report as well, as they've increased it from, I think, 30 to 200 just in the last couple of years. Also increasing the number of intermediate range ballistic missiles. They're increasing the pulse of their naval shipbuilding, and they're really trying to build up their amphibious capability. So we found that they have the amphib capability to land at least 25,000 troops. They're also, and this is something you may want to focus on specifically in the report, Bill, they're working very hard to adapt their civilian shipping capability to assist in an invasion like that. You know, the ferries, the barges, they're adapting those vessels and they're training with them. So they're giving all the signs that this is an option that they consider to be viable. Now, what we've recommended, I should say, we make the point, and I think it's very important to keep in mind, the decision, their decisions regarding Taiwan are political decisions. So the military component is important because it affects the options that they may think they have available. But ultimately, it's political decisions, and there's still a lot of risks involved. Even if the trend lines continue in this direction, if they were to move in that kind of a fashion. There are also, from their point of view, potentially very substantial upsides if they were to move and to be successful. We recommended, we had two recommendations. One of them relates to making it easier for Taiwan to buy military equipment for their own defense. You know, currently it takes a long time, even after we approve defense sales. And then the main recommendation really tracks a lot of what Indo-PACOM has been asking for, which is getting more precision munition into theater and more anti-ship cruise and ballistic missiles into the theater, hardening our bases so that they're more survivable. In other words, to strengthen short-term military deterrence in China's near seas, because we think that will help stabilize the situation.
Great. Commissioner Camphausen or Commissioner Wong, anything you want to add?
Or correct?
Roy?
Oh, Senator Talent summarized it brilliantly.
All right. Commissioner
You can
Wong?
quote him on that, Bill, if you want to.
Will do.
Yeah, just, hey, Bill, it's Alex Wong. I mean, just stepping back, and everything Senator Talent said was correct, so nothing to correct. But stepping back, as Carolyn mentioned, this is one of our top priority recommendations on enhancing our deterrent capability with regard to a Taiwan contingency. We make that recommendation because I think we all recognize that a Taiwan contingency, or the Taiwan Strait, is among the top flashpoints in the world, if not the top, and we want to prevent that conflict. So the recommendations focus on improving our deterrent capability to balance what China's investments have been, as well as ensuring that Taiwan can more easily obtain those defense articles required for its own defense, articles of defensive character, and speeding our ability to provide for that.
Great, thanks. Jameson, next question.
Yes, the next question is from, I think, our friends over on Capitol Hill. Jimmy Loomis, can you state your affiliation and your question?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Jimmy Loomis with the Office of Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy. First of all, thank you all for the important work that you do, especially for the congressional offices. I know I've worked with many of you, but in particular, China's positions in Latin America and the Caribbean is of particular focus to our office. I'm curious how you assess developments over the past year, particularly from a security and defense angle, both China's strategic interests in the region and specific countries of focus in the region.
Thanks, Jimmy. I think we can. I think Commissioner Scissors and I co-chaired this hearing, and we came away thinking that the security presence of China in Latin America is still small, but growing. We have concerns, of course, about their interests in ports around the region and what that could ultimately mean. We talked about on the economic side, but it's also security side, their drive for acquisition of resources and some of those resources which are critical to new technologies. One of the areas where it crosses over with some of the economic and security work that we do, and also the political positioning that they're doing, right? I mean, the activities that they are doing, developing relationships with people from local government officials all the way up for people in business, and then using those relationships to have an impact on China's diplomatic initiatives at the UN and other places. So it's sort of a broad approach that they are taking that raises a number of questions for us. And certainly I think we all came away really believing that one of the answers for us is that we really need to have sort of have another, what's the word I'm thinking of? Anyway, improve this state of our relationship with countries in Latin America. We need to have much more robust relationships ourselves. Commissioner Scissors, anything you want to add?
Yes, I mean, I agree with all that, and I think the Commission made a good choice to have a hearing on Latin America, because I don't think your office may be an exception, Jimmy, but I don't think a lot of U.S. policymakers realize the scope of Chinese involvement. They kind of get the idea that China wants to buy Latin American commodities, but associated with that is a lot of other Chinese involvement, including in the security sphere. I'll just add, we first have to catch up, as Carolyn just said, to where the Chinese are and think of our responses. I'll just add a quick thought about the future. The pandemic has changed Chinese global economic behavior. When it ends, which is hopefully soon, we could see a surge of new Chinese interest in Latin America. We're still catching up to where they already are. It is possible, and this is speculative, that 2023, for example, we'll see a surge in Chinese activity in the region, making the recommendations of catching up by the U.S. That much more important.
Carolyn?
Yes, Robin?
Jimmy, thank you for your very important forward-looking question. I think one of the things to think about is in close to $500 billion in Chinese policy bank lending. Half of that's in Latin America right now, and trying to tie up critical supplies of lithium and cobalt. And the other issue that ties in with what Jim said earlier is 9 of the last 15 relationships that Taiwan has in terms of recognition are in the region, in the Caribbean. So a focus of U.S. policy attention and interest ought to be in sustaining those critical relationships between Taiwan and Latin America.
One final thought on this too, Jimmy, is it was really clear that the Chinese government really uses a whole of government approach as it's approaching countries in Latin America. So they can pull in financing as state-owned enterprises are interested in doing activities. They might actually pull in some military training. They just pull. They use all the levers of their government power in order to accomplish what it is they're wanting to accomplish. It doesn't seem particularly siloed, and that is certainly different than how we do things. So, all right, on to the next question.
Thank you. And just a reminder for those joining, if you do want to ask a question, simply click the participants button on your app and then click the hands to get into the queue. So we're using the raise hand feature. The next question is from Paul Shinkman. Paul, could you state your affiliation and your question?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, this is Paul Shinkman with U.S. News and World Report. 2 questions, please, both on Taiwan. First, how do you assess U.S. Chinese deconfliction channels? Do you believe that they're strong enough to prevent any misunderstanding that could lead to an escalation in war, whether that's in Taiwan or any other potential hotspots? And then secondly, China has stated that some of the U.S. recent moves has violated the One China agreements and communiques, including deploying special operations and Marine Corps trainers to Taiwan. How do you assess the U.S. balance between deterring China and bolstering Taiwan's ability to defend itself, while also not provoking China into taking military action? Thank you.
That's a good and extensive question. I'm actually going to ask first Commissioner Camphausen to give this one a shot.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for the questions. It is the case that what is sometimes called crisis communication, or as you put it, deconfliction measures in times of heightened tension, are not a strong suit of the U.S. China, especially U.S. China military relationship. And so there are efforts begun in the last administration and continued in this for enhanced cooperation, but this is not, in my judgment, having worked with the Chinese military for 25 years, it's not a high priority for the Chinese military to engage in de-escalation measures. They regard that as a political set of activities, and the military avoids those actions unless they are within very tightly bounded parameters. So it is the case that we have some agreements that dating back to 2013, 2014, that are intended to govern how our militaries, both air and sea, operate when in close proximity to each other. But the larger, I think, context is that the Chinese military regards efforts to push the U.S. and U.S. forces further from China to be a central priority. And the United States, irrespective of administration, judges that operating in the international air and seas off of the Asian mainland is a prerogative that any nation state has. It does not regard the East and South China Seas as the territorial waters of China, as many of China's efforts would seem to suggest. So this is an ongoing challenge. It's first addressed at the political level, and then to some extent the militaries can make some minor contributions along the way. To your second question, maybe just briefly, what has not changed over the course of the last year or so is the presence of U.S. forces on Taiwan on a temporary basis for training and other purposes. That has been said is a longstanding practice on the part of the U.S. military to assist Taiwan's self-defense capability. What is different is that it's being talked about more openly. And I think the judgments that have been made by administrations are that this is an essential set of activities in view of ever more threatening and aggressive behavior on the part of the PRC that are of highest priority to prevent the kind of aggression against Taiwan that would be so destabilizing, as Senator Talent talked about earlier. The activities in the ADIZ, and we know an ADIZ is not an air defense. It's not the territorial air of airspace of Taiwan, but the activities in the ADIZ really demand a response, and so ramped up cooperation between the U.S. and China is, I think, a necessary response in the face of that activity.
Senator Talent or Commissioner Wong, anything that you want to add?
Alex may want to. I think Roy covered it.
Alex?
No, I think that's good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. On to the next question.
Can I get a quick follow-up?
Okay, Paul, what is it?
Yeah, just very quickly. So on that first point about the lack of communication with the Chinese military, is there any offsetting that they don't operate with the same sort of autonomy independent of their political system? Like, would the political system be responsible for that kind of communication, and therefore it isn't as much of a problem?
Well, a quick question, but I think it's got a complicated answer. Roy, you want to give it a try?
I'm not sure I got it. Could you say it again, Paul?
You talked about how the Chinese military is less interested in deconflicting with their American counterparts. Is that at all offset by the fact that they don't act with the same sort of autonomy that perhaps the U.S. military does? That they would wait for instruction from their political masters before they would act upon any act of aggression?
Well,
How do you disagree with that premise?
what it does mean in an event of miscalculation, this is what U.S. defense leaders talk about a lot. In such an event, there's much less autonomy at the tactical level for the Chinese military leaders to respond in de-escalatory ways. They have to wait for instructions, typically. And so it actually lends itself for escalation in the near term until there is an intervention at the political level.
Carolyn, I know your question, Paul, was on Taiwan, but I think Alex or Jim, in terms of nuclear posture, one of the things that we pointed out and perhaps you could address is the rapid increase in capability presents a question around launch on warning and the risks related to who will be in charge in the event of that miscalculation. Alex or Jim, can you talk a little bit about the nuclear posture and launch on warning concerns?
I'll let Alex, he chaired that. I do have a comment to add to what Roy said, though, about chain of command.
Sure. Let me just dive in on that launch on warning item that Robin raised. You know, we held a hearing and we have a whole section in this year's report on China's buildup of its nuclear forces. And there are a number of reasons why the United States and truly the world should be concerned with that. But one of the chief reasons is this possibility for miscalculation because China is building up capabilities to have what's called launch on warning capability. And it's unclear whether China has the right protocols and command and control to prevent miscalculation or an inadvertent launch or a launch that's not warranted from a perceived threat from the United States or other nuclear powers. And we don't know that in large part because the Chinese do not take part to the same level as other nuclear powers in transparency talks, in stability talks. So that is a worry, and that is a chief reason why we have focused in part on nuclear forces, and it's a source of instability in the region.
Well, I'll add generally to this topic that Beijing began, I think it's 5 years ago, a major restructuring of the PLA, including their operational command practices and protocols in the event of a conflict, in the event that they have a mission. And it's designed to, I think, enhance, to shift a little bit away from border defense, which is what they were focused on, to power projection. Now, we're not certain, and they're not certain, how effective all that has been. They're very concerned, and I think this is sincere. They'll say it publicly, and I think they mean it. They're very concerned about readiness issues having to do with the PLA. And they're both concerned about maintaining party control over the PLA, but also concerned about their commanders taking enough initiative in the event of a conflict or lead up to conflict. And so this is an area where of some uncertainty. The encouraging thing about that is that uncertainty is a constraint on them and any aggressive actions that they may be thinking about, because they're not certain that they're going to be able to carry out missions. But the downside of it is the kind of issues you're talking about and Roy talked about. In the event of some kind of conflict or high tension situation, they don't have the same kinds of command and control procedures in place that we do. And it's a potential destabilizing factor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Carolyn, could I
quickly.
Carolyn, could I add one quick point?
Yep.
Paul, it's worth checking out that section of our report in the nuclear chapter, which talks about the co-location or basing of conventional and nuclear armed missiles. And this is an intentional effort on the part of the PRC to confuse and delay the decision-making on the part of any military that might consider attacking China. The problem is this is hugely escalatory because China regards any attack on its sovereign territory as grounds for escalation even to the nuclear level. And so this intentional act to co-locate conventional and nuclear missiles contributes to this atmosphere of the potential for miscalculation in both the nuclear and in the conventional space.
All right, let's move on to the next question.
Thank you.
Yes, the next question is from Kerr Gibbs. Kerr, could you give your affiliation and your question?
Yes, thank you very much. This is Kerr Gibbs. I'm the president of the American Chamber of Commerce here in Shanghai. And first of all, I want to thank the Commission for your important work. Also, thank you for citing our statistics. We work hard on surveying our members and collecting data for the purpose. One of the purposes is to provide data for policymakers so that you can get a clear picture of what's going on over here. I don't know whether that particular piece of data came from our organization or one of the other three AmChams over here in China. My question is about that 85% number. I'm just curious what, given the changing nature of the relationship over time, what would the Commission be expecting from the business community over here, from the American business community that's established here in China? What would your hope or expectation be? And I got the sense, by citing the 85% number, I got the sense that there is one. And so I wonder if you could discuss that, and then also kind of what, if you were looking for an outcome, what would the mechanism be for changing the posture of the American business community here, and what would that outcome look like? In other words, how would that be helpful to the issues that we're discussing here that are mainly around the national security sphere?
Kurt, thank you for that question. I think what you would find from different commissioners is probably a different response to that, but I want to let's start with Commissioner Wessel on this one. Mike?
Thank you for your question and for all that you do. I think this year's report, raises a number of questions regarding the relationship, a lot of it around supply chains, and the question of CCP directed involvement in U.S. companies operating in China. So we've asked for greater transparency about Chinese, that CCP cells and personnel working within companies, U.S. companies, to understand what impact they've had on decision-making. We have recommended that there be greater visibility into the investments and contractual relationships by U.S. companies in terms of supply chains to understand what risks there might be. And we've also looking at the question of capital formation and questions about what risks there might be to both U.S. investors and U.S. economic interests overall. So much of this is designed to, to expand our understanding of what's happening within U.S. and all foreign companies operating there, what the risks are to our national and economic security interests, and to build on that over time.
Yeah, and I would add, actually, well, first, Kurt, joining Mike in thanking you for the information that you provide. We actually use AmCham statistics every year in our report, although it's not necessarily AmCham Shanghai. As I watch things, particularly as I look at Hong Kong, I just see that U.S. businesses are going to be getting in more and more of a squeeze, essentially, from their operational interest and the values that people back here in the United States are really talking about and exercising. Beijing Olympics is a perfect example of that. Companies that are spending a lot of money, U.S. companies that are spending a lot of money to have a presence there are right up against the concerns about the genocide in Xinjiang. In Hong Kong, of course, the concerns about the national security law, the crackdowns that we are seeing that China is doing, not just on people, but on the ability of companies to function. Things like what's going to happen with cross-border data transfer, the ability of companies that work in tech that have been building the whole internet on the idea that it's about the free flow of information, censorship that's happening. I think it's an increasingly difficult business environment for American companies, and are interested in seeing how they manage those tensions that are taking place. Robin, did you have something you wanted to say?
Derek, Derek?
Yes, thanks. Mike already went through the list of some of the actions, and I think there's a theme in them that's relevant to you, Kerr, and by the way, hi. We're trying to be responsible here by gathering better information for U.S. policymaking. That has to be done. So better information on activities of U.S. firms in China, better information on U.S. portfolio investment going to China, for example. Nobody can make good policy, whether you and I or others on the commission would agree on it or not. We can't make good policy if we don't know what's going on. So I think the main thrust of our recommendations, as Mike laid them out, is to set up a situation for better policy. And I'll tell you what I want connected to that from the business community is, and I don't mean to accuse you or any business in Shanghai, this is a general comment, mostly related to US-based businesses, stop getting in the way of transparency. Stop saying, I don't want to disclose this. Stop saying, I don't like the light shined on my activities in China because it makes me look bad. Well, guess what? If it makes you look bad, maybe you shouldn't be involved in it. So when business says, hey, I don't like these restrictions, I understand that. But when business says, I don't want to tell you what's going on, that's a problem. So that would be one expectation I have. And in terms of the mechanism, we've heard a lot from leaders of business that said this both publicly and privately. You will follow American law, make the law, and we'll follow it. And I respect that, and I believe that. And so, putting all these points together, we're going to try to create a more transparent environment for policymaking. Then we're going to make laws that we expect the business community to follow.
Great. Robin, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I think we've answered the question.
Commissioner Borokoff, I think, did you have something you wanted to add?
Not to pile on, but backing up a lot of what Commissioner Scissors just said, I want to say that just as a guy who's an American businessman for 40 years with thousands of employees over those years, the one thing that makes American businesses work is because we have rules of engagement and we operate under the rule of law, and we have transparency in America more than we used to even a few decades ago. Sarbanes-Oxley was enacted as a result of a major business, Enron, failing because it wasn't disclosing with great transparency how it ran its business. And the one thing that isn't happening is that China doesn't disclose what it does, particularly when it comes to our investors investing in businesses over there. And so it's virtually impossible for people to know exactly where their money is going because for over 13 years, Chinese companies have refused to give the sorts of transparent information that our companies have to give in our country. They don't provide who owns the business, what else do they own? In the Cayman Islands, we know that we have these, and in another part of our report, we have these VIEs, these variable interest entities that are effectively owned by shell companies. And we're not saying, our recommendations are not designed to prevent American businesses from investing in Chinese businesses or for American businesses to not operate in China. A lot of those businesses are extremely profitable and making Americans lots of money, but they are designed to give Americans an opportunity to know what they're investing in and to prevent Americans from investing inadvertently in forbidden businesses through transfer to entities that shouldn't get money, or from putting money into businesses that are simply unstable, and we have no way of knowing that.
Great.
So that's what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Bob. So let's move on to the next question.
Okay, the next question is from Hiroaki Nakanishi. Could you please state your affiliation and your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Hiroaki Nakanishi, member of Liberal Democratic Party of Japan. I want to go back to the last session on nuclear issues. I would like to ask members, if possible, is there any possibility to have arms control negotiation with China or strategic stability conversation with China? Member Roy mentioned about the risk of entanglement in the combat between China and the U.S. Whether it's possible, like rebuilding the lost INF treaty, in the way covering China and in the Pacific and the world, especially maybe if we could limit the dual capability of intermediate ballistic missile in the Indo-Pacific could contribute to minimizing the risk of nuclear exchange at worst. So if possible, I would like to hear any advice. How can we incentivize China to further arms control and or strategic stability talk? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Should we start this one? Commissioner Wong, do you want to give this one a stab?
Great. Well, thank you for the question. And you know, your focus on arms control talks, I think, is warranted. And the reason, just to step back again, the reasons that the Commission is focused on China's nuclear arms again are generally threefold. Number one, because of the diversification, expansion, of China's nuclear weapons, it has three threats. Number one is a possible move from China off of its no first use policy, its longstanding no first use, if longstanding but unstable policy, and that warrants discussion because that raises instability questions. Number two, we've already mentioned, is the possibility of a miscalculation or an inadvertent launch because of a move to launch on warning capability. And third, there's a concern that China's buildup is intended, and we don't know this, but it may be intended to make the region safe for conventional warfare or coercion on the part of China. And these are things that need to be talked about. So, you know, well, our recommendations are generally twofold. Number one is funding and authorizing a comprehensive diplomatic strategy, not just with China, with our allies and partners around the world as well, but with China to move them into an arms control discussion, into transparency discussions, whether in a trilateral or bilateral context. That's important. I think you've noted some of the difficulties of that, given that China up to now has not taken part, not just in arms control discussions, but in the types of transparency discussions that nuclear powers under the NPT regularly participate in. But I think, as you also noted, that China has rebuffed in recent years attempts to pull them into arms control discussion in a trilateral format with the United States and Russia. So hopefully that changes. But the second part of our recommendation is distinct but connected, and that is the continuing bipartisan agreement to invest in and modernize the U.S. nuclear arsenal. That enables us to deter not just China, but other actors around the world to keep us and our allies safe. But second, it gives grist to any negotiation, to any set of talks. It gives us leverage and a reason for China to enter those talks.
Jim, Roy, anything you want to add? No? Okay, let's move on to the next question.
Okay, and again, for those just joining, you can always ask a question with the participants button and the raise hand feature on your app. The next question is from Robbie Smith. Robbie, could you state your affiliation and your question, please?
Absolutely. So I'm affiliated with the Coalition for Prosperous America. And my question goes back to the conversation that we were just having regarding, the business community's efforts and responsibilities and what more can be done. Specifically want to address the capital formation question. Really appreciate the report hitting on, VIEs and some of those structures, but we know there's a lot more that needs to be done, regarding the A-share companies, which are not covered by the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act. but also looking more, I think, at the Wall Street accountability angle. I'm not sure if y'all saw, but the hypersonic missile that China launched over the summer, one of the contractors in it, Fidium, who helped to produce that new platform for them, is majority shareholder owned by a company called China Great Wall Technology, which is a publicly traded company. Now, its parent company is sanctioned in the U.S., part of the NSCMIC list, but Great Wall itself, which owns 31.5% of Fidium, isn't. And so what can we be doing to, I think, shine a light on those issues and create more accountability? Because these companies, even the ones that are publicly traded or even not, still appear, in FTSE and Black, all the different indexes around the world. And it's a huge problem because Americans are exposed to these, via their ETFs and other investment products.
Great. Thank you. I'm sorry that Commissioner Fiedler is not on the line because he was not able to join us this morning. He's been focused a lot on this, but I'm going to turn this over, starting first to Commissioner Wessel, who's been working on these issues for, I think, decades by now. Mike?
Thank you, and thank you, Robbie, for what you do, what Michael Stumo and others do at CPA with your long history there. And let me also ask my colleague Derek, who has been a partner on all this, to jump in as well. First of all, we are aware, of course, of the capital flow issue to many companies that have been entity listed that are on the military list. We have a number of recommendations this year, including looking at index providers, et cetera, to make sure that we have, again, more transparency, that we harmonize our sanctions lists to make sure that a company cannot skirt our laws being on one list but not on another, so that we harmonize activities to make sure that U.S. capital within the bounds of our law are not supporting entities that have been designated by the U.S. Government as acting adverse to U.S. foreign policy or national security interests. There's a lot of work that needs to be done here. Clearly, China's quest for capital has grown over the years. We've seen instability, Evergrande, et cetera, and they are looking to the U.S. and other Western sources of capital to help fuel CCP policies. So we have a number of recommendations in this area, which both within the top 10 and otherwise. But as Derek also pointed out earlier, we need to ensure we have the proper information and data to make the decisions, and that investors understand what the bright line tests are, that they know what is legal, what is illegal, and so we are hoping to help Congress and other governmental entities deal with this issue. Derek?
Derek, do you have anything you want to add?
Sure. Similar thoughts from Mike, but maybe a little bit different direction. I'll start off by saying, we don't want to just tag Chinese firms or activities randomly and say, oh, that's good. They worked with the PLA once. They're a military-linked firm. That's not appropriate. We need to have good grounding for our actions. One of the reasons we need to have good grounding for our actions is our actions need to be more consistent and more serious, as Mike said. So one example, as you brought up, is subsidiaries and parents. If the parent has done something we really don't like and it's justified U.S. sanctions, all the subsidiaries should be sanctioned. Similarly, if the subsidiary has done something we really don't like that deserves U.S. sanction, you don't let the parent out. So that's a step, an obvious step in U.S. policymaking that, as you noted, we have not implemented yet. Another one along the lines that Mike brought up is the rationalization of our sanctions. And let's just give an example. If we say we don't want to share this technology with the Chinese because we've decided it's too sensitive, and there are issues about our export control decisions right there, but if we've already decided the technology should be shared, we certainly don't want to give the Chinese money to develop that technology. If they're going to do that themselves anyway, but we don't have to help them. And so one example of rationalizing sanctions is if the technology is restricted, then money to support that technology should also be restricted. And that's just sensible American policy. I don't mean, as I said at the outset, we should just start restricting everything in sight. But when we do so, it should embrace subsidiary parent relationships and include both technology and financing.
Great, thanks. Next question, Jameson?
Yes, the next question is from Philip Rogers. Philip, could you state your affiliation and your question?
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Philip Rogers. I'm a PhD candidate at UC Berkeley and a predoctoral fellow of the Georgetown Global Political Economy Project. And I just wanted to briefly ask how the Commission would assess the current state of play with regards to Chinese efforts to dominate international standard setting for things like 5G and other technical specifications that underpin interoperable technologies, Internet of Things, et cetera. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We have, over the course of the past few years, raised concern about standard-setting bodies and what the Chinese government might be up to in terms of getting key personnel into what, for a lot of people, looks like obscure working groups or agencies. But it is an issue that we have focused on in the past. And I believe we have a list on our website of standard-setting bodies and that the Chinese leaders that have Chinese leaders right now, and I think we try to keep that updated, but it is an issue that we focused on.
It's a list of international organizations where Chinese have senior leadership positions. Jim, you chaired the hearing on standard setting last year.
It was part of the chapter, Philip, in last year's report. We did a chapter on what Beijing's global ambitions are. In other words, what is the end stage that they're seeking to reach with regard to the international order, and how are they going about achieving it? And as part of that chapter, we discussed two things. One, the tactic they use of, subverting existing international institutions to their ends, and then also building new regional and international institutions to supplant the existing ones. In the context of the first, we discussed standard setting. The conclusion I think we reached was that they are very energetically going about it, and that it is, and we made several recommendations for the United States and its allies and partners to compete effectively in that area. But the results to this point for them are mixed, because some of the tactics are pretty obvious. For example, flooding international standard setting body with, with new technology proposals. They want their scientists and others to do that because it gives them more influence, but it's been pretty easy for these standard setting bodies to realize what's going on. So it was a year ago that we did it, but I would refer you to that chapter. They're having varying degrees of success. Where the standard setting body is linked to international agencies that they can use, where they can use their diplomatic and economic leverage, I think it's a bigger danger. And now I'm sorry, which one is it that is officially actually a UN body? They've been pretty effective in dealing with that one. Yeah, what was that, Robin? I'm sorry.
I'm going to defer to Mike, but the International Telecom, is that the one?
Yeah, it's telecom.
Right.
Mike, I don't know if you want to add anything, but we've made a number of recommendations, and it's important for us to compete effectively in that area. I would go back, Philip, and look at our chapter and other commission resources on that.
Yeah, and
Carolyn, can I?
One of the challenges on this issue has been that the Chinese government is engaged in the people who they are having move into these positions, and often in a lot of them, it's a private sector responsibility here in the United States. So there's sort of an inequity in terms of effort and recognition, and also just paying attention to what's going on. Robin, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think it's important not just to look at how they're trying to subvert standards to take over positions in these institutions. There's a flip side of the coin, which is subverting the very standards that those institutions are trying to apply globally. If you look at Chinese lending practices relative to World Bank lending practices, Chinese official policy banks have secrecy clauses, they have cross-default clauses, they have requirements that for commodity accounts to back the loans. They can terminate loans if there's political adversity. So I think it's positioning people, changing the standards, but then also turning around and subverting the standards in their own practices.
Carolyn, just a very quick comment. What we also saw as part of our hearing and follow-on action with government agencies is the U.S. and China approach standard setting in a very different way. U.S. is mainly private sector led, and it's looking at advancing the overall technologies. It's advancing within the health field, the global commons as it relates to disease prevention, addressing, etc. With China, the standard setting is often designed to advantage individual Chinese companies. So it has more of a industrial policy or policy guidance behind it.
Great, thanks. On to the next question.
Yes, the next question is from Joshua Cartwright. Joshua, could you state your affiliation and your question?
Absolutely. So hi, my name is Joshua Cartwright. I'm with Johns Hopkins SAIS. And my question is going back to the human rights abuses in Xinjiang and Hong Kong. It's quite well documented, quite easy to condemn. But what does the USCC actually propose the US do about it? Are there any major changes to policy that you would like to see? And also just kind of a throwaway general question, is there anything the USCC in terms of major changes would like to see in the Biden administration's China policy? Thank you.
We're going to answer the first question, and that second one is not just a throwaway question. It could take us hours to address that. I'm going to turn to Commissioner Glass, who has a couple of recommendations related specifically to Xinjiang, prefacing it with, there is another, the CECC, the Congressional Executive Commission on China, also has primary responsibility for human rights. So we have a tendency to focus this where it connects with the economic and the security issues. Kim?
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you so much for the question, given the magnitude of this issue and the sort of the public, in the public realm. This was a serious issue that you'll see throughout our commission report about the atrocities happening in Xinjiang to the Uyghurs. And the commission felt very strongly that one of our top 10 recommendations is that the U.S. government needs to act quicker and more forcefully related to the use of forced labor, not just by a sectoral approach, whether we're talking silica, tomato, cotton, and cotton products, but to essentially ban any products that are originating from Xinjiang because we came to the conclusion that the pervasiveness of forced labor in this particular region of China and even beyond is something that needs aggressive and immediate attention by the administration. And we are asking Congress to help urge the administration through legislation on expanding the WRO. In addition, we believe very strongly that we need strong enforcement mechanisms associated with products coming into the United States. A White House fact sheet in June of 2021 indicated 35 of 49 active WROs were on goods from the PRC and 11 were on goods originating from Xinjiang. We think the issue is much more pervasive, and we are requesting that Congress move forward with legislation to first assess from the Department of Homeland Security what the needs are in order to effectively enforce an enhanced WRO and the current WRO, and then ensure that the necessary appropriation is made to effectively enforce this. This is an immediate and pervasive problem. There's other recommendations, and I might turn to Mike Wessel here, related to VIEs and some of the investment recommendations related to transparency and cracking down on U.S. investment, unknowing investment that's potentially perpetuating the use of forced labor.
Thank you, Kim. Kim, identified our core recommendation here, but we have also suggested that the SEC, as part of its rulemaking process on environmental, social, and governance standards, ESG, address this issue and have company reporting on it. There needs to be a lot more transparency. That's one of the themes throughout our report, that data-driven results, and we need to know exactly what companies are doing. The impact on human rights, forced labor, is an ESG issue, and it needs to be directly incorporated into governmental actions on that issue.
Yeah, and I'll add an issue that we have not specifically looked at, but I think we need to be thinking about the issue with the Uyghurs, not just in the context of Xinjiang, but really in the context of forced labor, because as more and more people are being, more and more Uyghurs are being relocated out of Xinjiang to work in factories and farms in other provinces, we don't want them to fall outside the net of what is being caught and prevented. All right, next question.
Sure, the next question comes from Indu Saxena. Indu, could you please state your affiliation and your question?
Sure, thank you. I'm Indu Saxena, Deputy Director at the Indo-Pacific Researchers, at the Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers. So my question is related to the Southeast Asian nations. I just want to know about how U.S. can assure the ASEAN countries about why not choosing the RCEP and CAP, TPP, how to assure an allies at the economic front, where we see that China is pouring, investing huge in those countries. And like, if I would say in the theories, like bandwagoning and hedging towards China, those countries. So is there any chance and possibility in Biden administration to work on RCEP and CAP, TPP? Thank you.
So I want to start first by saying that one of the things that the U.S. government needs to do is to have a presence in ASEAN countries. It's a broader question that you're asking, but we need to be there. We need to assure countries of our continuing presence, our continuing interest in the interests that those countries have. I'm going to turn this question over to Roy Camphausen on the trade aspect of it. I will note that we do have some disagreements among commissioners about the nature of trade agreements. But Roy, you filed an additional views. I think it was more specific to Taiwan, wasn't it? But can you talk a little bit about what you see as the views on these issues?
Yes, and as apparent to our audience, I'm not a trade person by background or experience, but it strikes me that if we regard the nature of U.S.-China strategic competition in as broad a way as it is presenting itself, then we ought to consider a range of options to deal with this challenge. Or put differently, we should make use of all of the tools in the toolkit to compete with China. And it's clear that China views multilateral trade agreements as an avenue or as a space in which to compete with the United States. I mean, we see the recent example in which the PRC has applied to join CPTPP as an example of an effort to be a part of and lead in the regional trade system in Asia. So we argued in our additional view that the broad consideration of multilateral trade agreements needs to be part of the toolkit that we, as a country, take up in our competition with China. And it's not an endorsement of a rejoining of CPTPP. It's rather a reflection that we are leaving some of the tools available to us unused.
Great. And just to fill in terms of how we are thinking about it and talking about it in the commission, I'm going to recognize Commissioner Wessel.
Thank you, and I saw Derek's hand is up as well, so I'll again cede to him afterwards. Look, I think there's less disagreement among the commissioners than may be apparent. The fact is that we are trading with many of these countries. Economic engagement is the right thing to do. I think the concern which was reflected in the additional views is that the past model of trade agreements has been deficient, in that we need new approaches that, update and reform our rules, that don't look at trade agreements simply as a tool of foreign policy, but rather recognize their economic impact on the U.S. and focus more on that. And I think the additional views accurately reflect that. And it's something that I think on a going forward basis, we will all be able to work on. I think there's less disagreement that, trade agreements, economic tools are in the tool chest. They've been inaccurately or inappropriately designed in the past. We need to update them, and then I think there's a basis for moving forward.
So I just want to say we've got about another 18 minutes left in this session. Derek, do you have something additional that you wanted to add? I think Robin, you wanted to say something, and then we're going to have to wrap up with just a few final questions.
I'll be really quick. The Biden administration just this week has started talking about a 2022 trade initiative in the Indo-Pacific using language like 2022 Indo-Pacific trade framework. So very, very close to, sort of regular language. That may be a topic for us to take up next year if the trade policy starts in the administration. So if they follow through in that initiative, it's something we may talk about. We're going to have to face the fact that the U.S. is divided over trade, and if there's a meaningful trade initiative, it's going to have elements that everybody doesn't like. They like these 5 elements, they don't like these 2. So hopefully the Biden administration will follow through. We will be able to address it, and it's a bipartisan commission. If we can hack out some agreement on a trade approach, maybe that will take hold in Congress next year.
Robin, you have something you wanted to add?
No, thank you.
Great. Okay, next question.
The next question is from Marcos Kounalakis. Marcos, please state your affiliation and your question.
Hi, this is Marcos Kounalakis in San Francisco. I'm at the Hoover Institution, and I appreciate greatly the focus on transparency that you've all really made clear in the Commission report. I'd like to ask about one of the institutional structures, both in the United States and internationally, that actually enables the lack of transparency and that enables and underwrites oftentimes the ability for some of the activity to occur, and that's specifically the legal institutions and law firms. As we saw just recently, in fact yesterday, one of the law firms was able to facilitate the purchase in Italy of a strategic industry in the drone world. How does the Commission intend to report on, advise, and lead Congress to manage this vulnerability in what is clearly in contradiction to what it is you are advising?
Hi, Marcos. I'm going to start by saying that first, of course, we don't lead Congress anywhere. We make recommendations to Congress, and we serve as consultants when they want to learn more about the issue. And one of the things we have tried over the years of the Commission is to be forward-leaning in our issues. So I think you raise important questions about what the legal community is doing. I guess I would answer it by saying, as Derek said with other things, we need to be clear about what our laws are, and then we need to be clear that those laws are being implemented. When I think of the legal community right now, I particularly think of what's happening in Hong Kong and the decline of the rule of law there, and what role American law firms, right? I mean, what are they going to do? We just saw what happened with Mayor Brown, who's going to represent the Hong Kong University in the removal of the statue, the June 4th statue. It was a public outcry that got them to back off on that particular issue. So I think that there are a number of issues. I can't say that we have specifically looked at the U.S. legal community and what they do, but it's certainly something we should be thinking about going forward. Mike, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, and thank you for the question. And I am a lawyer. And,
so am I.
And our training is always to find a way to skirt the law, unfortunately. And so one of the important recommendations this year deals with export controls. And as part of our final wrap-up hearing, we had a number of experts, legal experts, who were providing information on leakages, if you will, ways to skirt the law. And we are always, seeking to understand what those are and how to fill those gaps. I think our recommendation, the Commission's recommendations on export controls, helps to address some of that, but that's only one area. So in that area, also, I guess in the investment area, we seek to clarify certain standards, certain reporting, harmonize the sanctions regimes to try and make sure that the opportunities for creative legal professionals to skirt the intent of the law is minimized and hopefully eliminated if possible.
And one of the issues that did come up in our Latin America hearing was that there are a number of countries that don't have a CFIUS process. I think what happened in Italy is a slightly different situation, but the countries that don't have a CFIUS process, and we are actively encouraging that the administration work with countries to help them create and implement CFIUS type processes so that the leakage of some of this technology that we're concerned about doesn't happen. Was told yesterday that the Biden administration is actually very actively working on these issues. Anybody else? If not, let's move on to the next question.
Sure, the next question is from Sunny Chung. Sunny, could you state your affiliation and your question?
Hi, my name is Sunny. I represent the Hong Kong Democracy Council, and I'm really happy that the Commission is having a very good report on Hong Kong and follow Hong Kong affairs very closely. And my question is more about the recommendation in the Hong Kong part, which I noticed that the Commission suggests the Congress and the administration trying to monitor the situation of Hong Kong within the WTO framework. So I have two questions. First of all, is that does the Commission suggest or will try to encourage the administration to revoke the Hong Kong WTO membership if necessary? And secondly, how would the Commission examine the relationship, especially between American companies and Hong Kong society interests? Would the Commission recommend the U.S. MCHAM or other business sectors of the U.S. to withdraw from Hong Kong if necessary? Thank you.
Robin, do you want to start?
I think, thank you for the question, and I think one of the hardest things in the world is to come up with some kind of approach on Hong Kong that can reverse what has happened and the tragic consequences for citizens in Hong Kong. We take an interim step, which is that we propose that in the annual certification on Hong Kong, that that legislation include language that assesses whether or not Hong Kong truly meets standards of autonomy. And I think that in terms of how it conducts external relations, I think we have not as a commission reached a consensus on that particular perspective. I would say probably Carolyn and I share the view that Hong Kong no longer operates the way Hong Kong once did. And so its status at both the WTO and then also in terms of customs treatment by the United States should be subject to immediate and rigorous reevaluation.
Yes, Robin, I think you captured it well. It has been in terms of pressuring, U.S. businesses to leave Hong Kong. That really, and that's a business decision that they need to be making, and they need to be assessing. A lot of businesses established or did a lot of framework work in Hong Kong because of the rule of law, and as the rule of law is being weakened, does it continue to make sense for them to be there? I just will note that I find it interesting that it seemed to be a number of expats who are leaving Hong Kong now based on COVID restrictions, when of course the national security law regulations provide a lot of reasons to be concerned. So, all right, on to the next question.
Did that address Sunny, did that address your question?
Yes, yes, thank you so much.
Great, thanks. Next question?
Yeah, the next question is from Navin Antony. Navin, could you please state your affiliation and your question?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Navin Antony from India, affiliated to the Week magazine based in Kochi and Delhi. I have a question regarding India and China. How do you see India's role in deterring China, considering that India is India is a democracy that is now part of groupings like the Quad, and also considering that many of the internal problems that India faces are quite similar to that of China, like income inequality, poverty, and other things. So how do you see India's role in the US-led efforts to contain China, both strategically and ideologically? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Robin is pointing to the fact that our executive summary has the flags of the Quad on there with India participating. This wasn't, excuse me, it wasn't an issue that we specifically focused on this year, though I think that we are all pleased to see India stepping up and working with us and working with Australia and with other countries in the region out of concern about what China's rise means. Sorry. What I find particularly interesting is when we were in India, I think it was in 2008, 2009 maybe, it was really clear that people in the Indian government were hedging and they weren't interested in trying to they wanted to not have to make a decision about aligning with the United States or aligning with China on this. And I really feel that those circumstances have changed, which provides a lot of opportunity for our countries to work together and to work in a multilateral way to address China's rise. I know, Jim, anybody else? Roy, anybody want to add anything?
Roy?
Sure, and I think Commissioner Scissors, who's done a lot of work on the economics, would have a useful add here as well. I think the United States has to be mindful of India's traditional non-aligned status, and so the asks that we make of India and need to be consistent with India's vision for its own place in regional security order. The Quad steps are good ones, but there's still some reticence in Delhi to proceed too rapidly. I think the first step is to take care of its own business in the border region, and observers I think are quite heartened by the important steps that the Indian military has taken to resist the kind of salami slicing pressure from the Chinese military that we've seen be effective elsewhere. It's still ongoing. Latest statistics, something like 600 or more facilities and logistical support locations on the Chinese side of the border, suggesting the buildup is continuing. But the first step is for India to continue to do what it's doing in the border region, and then, as I mentioned, step by step for the United States and other partners to talk about growing that role. But Derek, I wonder if you would add something on the economic and trade side.
Let me give a really concrete example that the Commission has discussed and is certainly being discussed policy-wise. India is a major source of active pharmaceutical ingredients for the United States, but it gets the chemicals from China. The Indian production is dependent on the Chinese. It is in U.S. strategic and economic interests in terms of secure supply chains that Indian production becomes more independent of China. And I think that's true in a larger sense. Indian economic development is a replacement for China in many supply chains. It's a source of growth for the world. So it is in U.S. economic interest, not just foreign policy interests, for India to succeed economically in key sectors and broadly. That requires, I think, the U.S. maybe to consider some concessions on the trade side to help India. Now, we need, in return, India to be moving in the right direction. And that's why I picked active pharmaceutical ingredients. This is an area where we agree. India wants to be more independent from China. We want India to be more independent from China. So it's an area where U.S.-India cooperation is possible. Elsewhere, it might not be. India may not want to move in a direction that we want, and we may not be able to engage. But I think there are some clear examples on the supply chain side where India can replace China to some extent with U.S. help.
Great. Thank you. We have time for one more question. Jameson?
Okay, the next question is from Germantes Lailari. Germantes, please state your affiliation and your question.
Yes, my name is Germont Lailari. I'm an independent researcher. I've written for several different think tanks. My question has to do with the next step after Taiwan. We know that Hong Kong 2 years ago was taken over basically by the PRC. In 1974, the Paracel Islands, Scarborough Fair in 2012, Spratly Islands. So in the Commission's opinion, where is China looking next after Taiwan?
Jim, you want to give that a try?
I think it's global, and I think they're really already there. That their intent, again, we found this in a chapter last year, is to advance towards their community of common human destiny, which it's pretty clear they define as replacing the existing rules-based international order with one that resembles a hierarchy with China at the top. And you'll see the practical effects of that, most especially in East and Southern Asia, because of course that's their strategic environment. But you'll see it all over. We had a chapter on Africa last year, now in Latin America. So in other words, they anticipate an order where there will still be rules to facilitate regular transactions, but where they are able to elide or avoid the rules when it's in their national interests. And for the United States, that would mean eventually at least abandoning our presence and our influence in East Asia. It would mean their assertion of sovereignty over the East and South China Sea actually being exercised and potentially dictating terms of trade and travel and what markets you can sell to and which ones you can't. It would mean an even greater regime of punishing other countries who criticize them, as they've done already to Australia. So things like the genocide designation from the Biden administration would provoke a reaction under those circumstances. And I think we're all coming to grips here with the extent of that ambition. But Taiwan is a key because Taiwan, it's a key strategically. Roy can expand on this, but it's a key right in the middle of the first island chain. And it's also, if they can accomplish assimilation on their terms with Taiwan, it will undermine America's credibility as a security guarantor in the region. So the implications for the United States are very, very great. But yeah, I think it's global. Now we've written about their ambitions in Africa, where they're, for example, a new military base possibly on the West Coast, and we're writing in this year on Latin America. But I just would not think of their ambitions as just being Asia focused.
Roy, anything to add? Otherwise, we'll have Jim had the last word. Great. Excellent. Jim, last word. Thanks very much. Thanks to all of our audience. We look forward to getting additional opportunities to speak with you. Robin, any closing remarks?
No, I just appreciate that the audience was global and that it appears to represent the kind of serious interest and alliance of interests as we examine the U.S.-China relationship. So thank everybody, particularly my colleagues.
Great. And our staff. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.